Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, now with the next installment of Isaac Asimov's short stories. This one is now a next robot story, and again now one of the ones that gets incorporated into iRobot. So, and the story is called Catch That Rabbit. Once again, it's not on the cover in any obvious way or at all that I can see, but at least it is in the table of contents. I point to it there. Catch That Rabbit by Isaac Asimov, page 139, 59. Support magazine, I don't want to crack it open too wide because it's kind of barely hanging together. So, and of course, you notice there are no more table of contents blurbs, but it does come with some. It does still have a blurb on the page where the story starts. So let's look at that. Publisher's blurb reads: when a machine breaks down and stops, an expert can usually fix it. But the problem was a robot that went crazy, became homicidal only when there were no homos to side. Not exactly the best description. It does not become homicidal. Come on, let's put to rest here any Frankenstein complex. This robot is not Frankenstein. But it does do something very strange, but only when nobody's watching, which is kind of interesting. It's very hard to track down what the problem is. It's like it knows you're watching, and everything works fine when you're watching. Everything's perfect. And you look away, you come back, and what is going on? So let's look at the artwork. Again, the artwork does not make it beyond this original publication. There's Powell and Donovan sitting across from this robot. Well, they've got this setup where there's one robot that leads 6 other robots that sort of work underneath it. And somehow there's this sort of large positronic field that by which the one controls the other 6 directly from positronic brain to positronic brains. So, but apparently even though they can utilize this field, nobody can understand what it is. So let's just hope the problem isn't that. It isn't. But if it had been, I don't know what they would have done. Anyway, we're supposed to be mining this asteroid, and the one is in charge of the others and directs them digging and piling here and doing different things as part of all mining activities. And these are robots. Problem is, when nobody's watching, suddenly they stop doing what they're supposed to do and start marching in formation back and forth, or some other just weird, nonsensical thing that doesn't get any work done for one thing, and it's just nonsensical. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? And then you come to the robot, and suddenly, as you just get near enough for it to know that you're coming, it goes back to normal. And you say, well, what were you doing? Well, I was doing whatever it was doing right before it suddenly started doing something crazy. And next thing I know, you're here, and nothing got done. I don't understand. And the robot, apparently really doesn't understand what happened. So here they are sitting there with it's obviously the lead robot of the 7 robots. And the lead, you can see, is kind of taking the thinker pose because he's trying to figure it out himself. I don't understand what happened to me. I don't know. This is all weird. So, poor little robot, well, that's a little. He's 7 feet tall. But at any rate, it does have one additional piece of artwork, which is kind of cool. As they're digging around through all these caves, they find what's the spy on them. So they're in these mines, and they go down a parallel shaft and kind of head in the same direction. And then there turns out to be a little hole in the wall through which they can look and see the robots doing, whatever it is they're doing. So here they are. They're, Powell and Donovan here on this side of a hole. And through the hole, they can see the robots doing whatever it is in the background. All doing their mysterious, non-productive activities. So that's kind of cool. And as we get further along here, I can note that the differences in the text are now dropping down significantly. We finally have an iteration of the first law. The others aren't mentioned by name, just the first law. And it is quoted here exactly the way it would normally be quoted, the way it's supposed to be quoted from the beginning. But like I said, in the earlier stories, it was kind of not clearly formulated and would be stated in various different ways. It kind of brought in the second law and so forth. But at any rate, now it's exactly the way the first law is supposed to be stated. So the only changes, the main thing is, in going to the new story, or the new version of the story, there's a whole bunch of material that got added at the very, very beginning. And I'll just quickly go all this thing, because it has, the new has this whole beginning of, the vacation was longer than 2 weeks. That Mike Donovan had to admit. It had been 6 months with pay. He admitted that too. But that, as he explained furiously, was fortuitous. U.S. Robot had to get the bugs out of the multiple robot, that's this one, the one that's in charge of the others, U.S. Robot, this robot, and there were plenty of bugs, and there were always at least half a dozen bugs left for the field testing, or Powell and Donovan. Okay. So they waited and relaxed until the drawing board men and the slide rule boys had said, okay, and now he and Powell were out in the asteroid, and it was not okay. He repeated that a dozen times, with a face that had gone beady. For the love of Pete, Greg, get realistic. What's the use of adhering to the letter of the specifications and watching the tests go to pot? It's about time that you got the red tape out of your pants and went to work. Now, that first part, all of that replaces something much simpler. It's just Michael Donovan's face went beady. For the love of Pete, Greg, get realistic. What's the use of adhering to the letter of the specifications and watching the test go to pot? It's about time you got the red tape out of your pants and went to work. So all that other stuff about vacation and the people working on stuff was added. One small change I did find, and can point at, entails just kind of pulling out some of the, well, let's just say some of the pulpish, some of the more pulpish turns of phrase. So, in the original, okay, all right. In the original, there's a paragraph that says, well, then look at our position. If everything works, fine. If anything goes wrong, we're up Trash Creek without any ore. We're on the spot, Mike. He blazed away for a moment in silence. Then, all right, have you got him outside? Which now gets replaced with, then look at our position. If everything works, fine. If anything goes wrong, we're out of our depth, and there probably isn't a thing we can do or anybody else. But the job belongs to us and not to anyone else, so we're on the spot, Mike. He blazed away for a moment in silence. Then, all right, have you got him outside? So you can see it kind of replaced a little earlier pulpishness, but also kind of the more zeal of original inspiration, and replaced it with something a little more sedate. As I recall, there's maybe one other place where a very tiny bit of explanatory material gets inserted, but I'd have to dig it out, and it's not worth tracking down. Other than that, and maybe one or two very minor things, the texts are identical. When you get, and the beginning thing, of course, when you get to the end, in the book, there's a whole bunch of italic stuff that takes the story back to Susan Calvin and her remembering of all this and so forth, whereas the other one cuts off at a very specific point, and that's all the same in the book up to that point. And the book just continues with some italic stuff about Susan Calvin, because after all, in the book, it's Susan Calvin's story, but she's kind of talking about her field test engineers, Mike Donovan and Greg Powell, and their particular adventure with this multiple robot. So that gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect from that story. Look at that. February 1944, astounding science fiction. Okay. So it's kind of a technical debugging story more than anything else. In a way, it kind of prefigures what will happen in later years when you develop a computer program and it'll do some of the strangest things, and you're looking at this thing saying, what is it doing? Because you've seen the program, you've gone through it very carefully, you've looked at it, you know what it's doing, you know what it says, you know what's supposed to be happening. Why is this thing going askew in whatever crazy way, a totally unpredictable way it goes? And maybe it turns out it's some really stupid thing, like a misspelling of a variable name that caused you to do one instead of the other. So it's, as the story goes, it's a little bit on the dry side, but not bad for late 43, early 44 when he was writing this story. So it's kind of a prediction of what's to go, and you can see the frustration. I still think that Powell and Donovan do seem to kind of snip at each other a little more than, I guess that's supposed to make a kind of reading drama, but I, for one, would just find that kind of annoying. Anyway, that's our next Asimov story. There's really not a whole lot to say about it, and like I said, it's collected into iRobot, so with the exception of the very minor bit changes I've talked about, it is essentially as is. So, thanks for listening.